Let's talk WWDC. I do have a brew, 500 mils of tea, get on my level, although it's not going to be brew time, it's going to be WWDC action, because we all want to know about what happened, what Apple released and stuff like that. So, without further ado, let's go straight into the thing that most people are talking about, which is iOS 7. So, this is iOS 7. It's a new UI and it looks a lot cleaner, and it's got translucent windows, and it does look a hell of a lot better than the current generation of iOS, and it's copying a lot of stuff from Android and Windows Phone. It looks a lot like it actually looks a lot like every other smartphone on the market, to be fair, in terms of OS. In the actual fact, it looks like AOKP on iOS. AOKP is like it's like a skin you can put over Android, like the skin you can put over the stock version of Android, and that's looks like kind of what Apple have done, which is quite funny and quite interesting. They've got an Android-esque task manager. Task manager has been revamped. They've got iMotion as well, and when you tilt the phone around, the wallpaper changes with it as well, which is kind of very gimmicky and pointless. New typography, which is quite cool actually. The typography on it does look very good. The typography geek in me went quite mad yesterday when I saw that, and it does look very good. You can slide from the bottom for a new control center, which actually is quite good. You can access things like flashlight from there and other bits and pieces, which is kind of quite funky really, because that means you don't have to have many other apps. You don't have to go into the control center to actually do anything you want to do, which is really good. We're also getting swipe from the left to go back as well, so that's kind of quite how a lot of Android apps work. Anyway, you swipe from the left and you go backwards, or you bring up a side menu or something like that, which is quite cool in a lot of the default apps with iOS, with Apple apps. We also get a new Safari, which looks a lot like IE10 in Metro, to be fair, or even looks a lot like the Windows Phone 8 browser, which is it's interesting, I suppose. We're also getting AirDrop for the iPhone. So AirDrop, if you don't already know, AirDrop is like a thing where you can create like an ad hoc sharing sort of network based upon peer-to-peer sharing via Wi-Fi. So if you've got like a load of Macs and you want to share some stuff, you can do it via AirDrop without emailing each other and things like that, and without having to do it through Dropbox and then go into the cloud and then come back down. So you can now do that with the iPhone and your iPad and all your iOS devices, which is quite a good idea. I have to say I'm quite looking forward to that actually as a concept. Camera as well, but it's getting a redesign. So there's you can swipe across to go to things like record a video. You've got square camera in there as well for your Instagram and other things like that. You've got your panoramic view as well. You can also do HDR within the thing, which is quite cool. I think you can you do that with your current iOS? I'm not too sure actually. Don't quote me on that. Photos was also getting a redesign as well. So photos, you can organise it by what they call moments, so by day and by location, which is quite cool because at the moment it's just a big pile of photos. So you can actually look at your photos based upon location, based upon time, based upon trips, that sort of thing, which is quite a really good idea. But Siri's now being changed to pretty much Google Now. It's pretty much what it looks like. It's going to give you weather, but it's going to give you in a kind of like a Google Now-y sort of way. You can also change male and female voices, so you can have a male or a female if you really want to. There's a lot more options within Siri. You can do a lot more things. You can control some things, like you can turn Wi-Fi on and off using it and other bits and pieces like that. And also, they're using Bing search, not Google, Bing search. Car screen integration. So this is one cool thing where you can, if you've got like something like Forward Sync or something like that, you can actually beam what's on your phone to your screen using like an iOS kind of screen as opposed to the inbuilt OEM car manufacturer screen, which is quite cool. So you can have calls and you can have things like music and all these other bits and pieces, which is controlled via your iOS device. You can control it via Siri. It's really quite cool. I have to say quite like that. Automatic updates in the App Store as well, so there's no more notifications saying you have to update shit, which is really good. New music app with iCloud integration, so when you go into music, you can actually access all your cloud-based music. So when you buy stuff and you've got something stored in iCloud, you can download it from the music app as opposed to going into iTunes, which is quite cool. iTunes Radio is coming as well. iTunes Radio is basically Spotify, but Apple's own version. It's going to be ad supported first off. You can get it's all free, but it's ad supported. If you've got iTunes Match, you can have it ad free. So that's quite cool. I mean, it's quite a good idea, but again, Spotify already exists on all devices, so I don't know why the hell you'd bother with iTunes Radio when you've already got Spotify and you're already paying for Spotify. I don't know why you'd have that instead, unless you already pay for iTunes Match, of course. Also, iTunes Radio is for Windows, Mac, and Apple TV as well. So this is through iTunes, of course. So no Android, no Windows Phone, none of that, but just Windows, Mac, and Apple. Probably that means they're not Linux, but that doesn't really matter. We're also getting per app VPN, which is really quite a cool idea. It's really good for things like if you've got Work VPN, as opposed to Work VPN taking over your entire device. So, because for instance, over VPN, I can't use Spotify for obvious reasons, because it'll rape the company's bandwidth. What I can do is I can just set up VPN for my email, just set up VPN for web browsing, or VPN for a specific app that I need to use for work, and then everything else can be not VPN, which is already quite a good idea. I have to say, I quite like that. You can also have phone, FaceTime, and iMessage blocking, which is brilliant. We never had that before, which is fantastic. So you can block people, which is fantastic. I don't know why they never had that in the first place. Activation lock, so people can't wipe your phone, or if they do wipe your phone and you lost it, they can't then use your phone again, which is really quite a cool idea. There probably is a way of circumventing that if you plug it into a PC and try and jailbreak it, maybe. But basically, if you've had your phone stolen and you say it's been stolen, even if they wipe that device, they can't have access to it unless they've got your Apple ID and password. So that's quite cool. Good idea. New SDK, of course, and it's out now as beta testing for all iOS devs, and it'll be out and about for the general public in fall or autumn, as the English say. So I'm going to do this as a big video, and it's going to last for half an hour. So if you didn't plan on this lasting so long, fair enough. But basically, I'm going to talk about iOS, and then I'll go into the other things that Apple released, and then we'll do some opinions on it, etc., etc. So iOS 7 basically is an Android/Windows Phone copier. A lot of the stuff that it's got, Android has had first. Some idiot was on, who was it? It was on Twitter. Paul Hallett was going on Twitter. I'm gonna shout him out because he's a really good guy. I've got a lot of time for him. He does a lot of stuff with Raspberry Pis and stuff. But he was saying that Android fanboys are getting a bit mad because Google copied a few things from iOS, and now Apple are copying Google. And I'm gonna let me roll back to that. Google did copy a few things, so copy, quote unquote. They did copy a few things from iOS, granted, but not as much stuff as Apple have copied from Google. Pretty much every time Apple release an iOS update for the past 2 years, it's copied Google pretty much across the board, and it's worrying because Apple cannot innovate anymore. I'll go into that later on as well. But Apple aren't innovating. They just can't. And they're copying a lot of the stuff that Android's doing, and they just can't innovate. There's nothing that's coming out of Apple now that's really innovative. All the stuff that they've sort of come. I mean, the UI is obviously their own UI, but it's based on other things. It's based on the current design of most things. It looks a lot better than iOS before. Personally, for me, I think it does. A lot of people are saying they don't like it, but I quite like it. But it just looks a bit too copying other people, which is just like, why? What the hell are you doing, Apple? It's just unnecessary. I mean, there's some really funky features in there, granted. I don't get the iTunes Radio. I don't know why you'd want to bother. I don't know why they're trying to compete with Spotify, because they won't. I mean, they will get a slice of the pie, but there's no way in hell Spotify will go down the thing. Because, believe it or not, Android still owns the majority of the market. Like, Apple, oh, bloody Tim bloody Cook was slating Android left, right and centre. He liked talking about it a lot and saying, oh, we've got the majority of the market and this, that and the other. But you haven't, though. You've got, okay, the iPhone probably has the majority in terms of phones in terms of physical phones and devices. The iPhone probably has the majority. In terms of in actual what the devices are using, it isn't Apple that's got the majority, because with Android you've got loads of choice. Not one device is taking the crown, apart from maybe something like the Galaxy S3 and the S4 now currently as well. The amount of units they've shipped with that is ridiculous. HTC One, etc. Not one of those single devices are outsaying the iPhone, but combined, Android as a platform is completely blitzing iPhone. And to be honest, I don't think that Apple will be around for much longer, especially the iPhone, because nobody really gives a shit about iPhones now, do they? I mean, from what I gathered, you always had an iPhone or an Apple device because it's cool to have and because you had the money to do it. It's like, oh, look at me, look at how cool I am, I've got an iPhone. Now that doesn't matter, because if you've got an iPhone, chances are iPhone. Okay, there's only one instance where iPhones are worth having. If you're old, fine, fair enough. I give it to my mum. She loves it. She gets on really well with it. It works really well for her. It's stupidly easy to use. Fair enough. It's still got that there. I'm not going to argue with that point. It's really, really, really easy to use. But for most other people, like my current generation, we can use shit basically. So because we can use shit, we don't need to have our hands held, and so we can use things like Android. And Android still, I think, still has a way to come. It's not as easy to use. There's lots of customization though, granted. I love the fact that with Android you can customize things to shit, and it doesn't matter. But with iOS you can, and it is very closed. As much as closed is a very broad term, being closed, it's a very closed ecosystem. Android is closed in the Android is kind of closed. It's not as open as it used to be, but it's still open. It's partly open source. You can do your own shit with it. You can root things. You can install your own custom apps if you want to. There's lots of really funky things with Android, but I have to say iOS and Apple are just copying what the market's currently doing, and that's just not Apple's way of doing things. They never have done that, and Apple died with Steve Jobs. That's what happened. Apple died with Steve Jobs, and that is just what it is. It's a real shame because I had a lot of time for Apple. I think Apple did some really cool, innovative stuff. But lately, they're just not there. They're creating stuff that the market has already done, and then claiming they invented it and innovated it. Oh, they innovated it and are putting it together in their products, and it's a real shame actually because Apple had so much going for them, and now they're just copying what other people are doing. But anyway, the rest of WWDC then, because to be honest, most things have been, most people are really interested in iOS 7 stuff, so then we'll go on to everything else. Right, so the new thing is OS 10, which is now being called Maverick as opposed to Lion or any of the Lion-y things. They did say that they were they did this joke and they called it Sea Lion. I was just like, this isn't funny, and then they called it OS X Maverick. It's quite a good idea, I suppose, in terms of changing the naming scheme, because obviously they were kind of running out of feline predators to actually use. Obviously mountain lion, snow leopard and all these other bits and pieces. They probably could have found something else they could have used, but to be honest, like bobcat, I don't know, something like that. But to be honest, the name's not too bad. I have to say the name's not bad at all, and the new logo for it's quite cool. So there's loads of new features. Basically it's a service pack. Again, it's not anything that major. I mean, I think the previous one was a little bit more major, but the one before that definitely was. Was it? I'm just trying to think. The last one was Mountain Lion, was it? The one before that was Snow Leopard. I don't know now. I can't even remember because I don't use Mac on a daily basis. But anyway, it's not really anything worth shouting about, really. Anyway, we'll go through what actually happened, and then I'll give you my opinions of it again. Support for multiple displays. Basically, before you never had, when you had multiple displays, that was fine, but it was never properly. It was always a bit of a mess, really. The bar at the top as well, when you access like the Finder and like the menu at the top, that is now going to cross all the screens as opposed to just the one, your primary screen, which is good. They should have done that in the first place. They're changing the calendar app as well, making it a bit more Outlook-ified and copying Google's pretty much copying Google's calendar. We're also getting App Now. Now this is a really cool feature. This is probably the only one I'd say it's actually worth upgrading to the new version of OS X4. Basically, if you've got a really if you're on the web browser, for instance, using Safari, and you've got a really intensive Flash-based game or something that's using a lot of resources, maybe a HTML5 thing that's using a lot of resources, using lots of CPU, if you cover it up with another window, it'll pause that and it'll bring the power consumption right down, let you use the new window, and then when you go back into the other app, it will still be there and it'll still be running and you'll still be able to use it. Really good idea. Saves power, saves battery life. Really, really, really good. I have to say, one of the best things for the new OS. Very, very good. Well, I say new OS, new service pack. Under the hood adjustments as well to reduce CPU usage and less battery use. So there's lots of little tweaks and things like that where they don't have as many interrupts and all these other bits and pieces, which is very under the hood. I'm not going to go into it. TechCrunch probably has a lot of some really good coverage on the entire of WWDC. Definitely worth going and checking out them. It seems to change quite a bit. Like TechCrunch do really good stuff, and then sometimes it's Engadget, and then sometimes it's other people. But yeah, at the moment, TechCrunch seems to be the best place to go to get all the information about it. Definitely worth checking out their shit. So OS X Mavericks, really not like a massive improvement. I think the only thing that really changes is CPU usage and things like battery life, which is a really cool thing, I suppose. That is kind of the only thing that I'd say that's worth getting. Everything else is kind of like little adjustments that kind of Windows already has. So yeah, it's again, non-innovative Apple again. So the other thing is the iWork for iCloud, which is basically Office 365 for iWork. They sort of tried to plug it, and mainly was when the guy came up with some chink. He came up and said he did a bit of a big spiel and said this is iWork, and he was expecting a clap. Nobody clapped, because it's essentially Office 365 / Google Docs. I don't know why they've never actually had this before, because it just seems a bit pointless. Basically, you can create something in iWork, it gets synced to iCloud. You can then recreate, and then you can go back into a browser, any browser, anywhere that supports HTML5. You can then edit it within the browser. That's pretty much Office 365 / Google Docs / Dropbox now. I think you can even edit stuff in Dropbox. Admittedly, very basic, but yeah, there's again nothing new, nothing innovative. Basically copying what the market's been doing. Why the hell they've not done this before, I do not know. It's not like they're short on people or money, so whatever. Now, the two extra things that happened is a new MacBook Air and a new MacBook Pro. So, the MacBook Air we'll talk about basically has, well, an all-day battery life is all you really need to worry about. There's not really anything else new. Same design, you know, same unibody design, etc., etc. Just getting the new Haswell chips and having all-day battery life, which is quite cool. In actual fact, somebody jokingly said on Twitter, they need to bring that to the iPhone, which is very true, because the iPhone does not have all-day battery life at all. iPhone battery life is horrendously crap, and it'd be interesting to see how iOS 7 deals with battery life, because I reckon iOS 7 will be even worse for battery life. And the only addition with that, the new MacBook Air, is 802.11ac. 802.11ac has a theoretical maximum of 1 GB via Wi-Fi, which is really cool. Except it's still in draft. It's still not been finalised. So there's some routers coming out that are AC, but I wouldn't recommend going out and buying one. When Apple did this before with when the N came out, they used the N draft, and it was a pain in the ass, because the trouble is when things are still in draft, they're still being played around with. Some of the protocols have not been finalised yet. So if you're running something that's N draft, when the actual full protocol and the full thing comes out, when it comes from the is it IWC? I don't know, something like that anyway. But basically, when they say yes, it's all fine and dandy to go, they'll release it, and it will change. And because it changes, when it actually becomes released properly, it's not in beta anymore. You have problems with older devices that were in draft. That's what happened with N. That's what will happen with AC. So really, I wouldn't necessarily recommend going with AC unless you're just going to run the same devices and replace all your devices when it comes out of draft, when it comes into proper production. But no, I mean, 802.11's AC gigabit through via, or theoretical maximum gigabit via Wi-Fi is a really cool idea. But again, wait for it to come out of draft. It's a really stupid idea for Apple to do that, considering N's pretty fast anyway, and most people don't have gig internet, so it's kind of pointless. And obviously with the new 802.11ac, they also brought out a new AirPort, which it's alright, man, I'm not really interested in that. Right, so the last thing is the Mac Pro. Now, the Mac Pro is, well, I'm gonna leave this little sound snippet. Phil Schiller said this during the keynote.
Can't innovate anymore, my ass.
Right, Phil. Can't innovate my ass. That's a load of bullshit. You can't innovate. It's essentially the short and long of that. Apple cannot innovate for shit. So they're releasing this Mac Pro, which is tinier, like really, really small, a lot smaller than the current Mac Pro. It's running the new Xeon chip, and it's just pointless because the industry will not go for it. But anyway, I'll go through specs and I'll talk about it, and we'll go from there. So, Use the on chip. It's tiny. It's got an I/O that lights up. So when you input output on the back, when you turn it around, it lights up. Getting Thunderbolt 2, which is 20 gigabits throughput, which is quite cool. 1866 megahertz of RAM. AMD FirePro graphics, which is basically 7 teraflops of compute power, which is quite cool. USB 3 as well, as you'd expect, although Apple haven't been going USB 3, they now are, because they realise that actually USB is kind of the industry standard. 802.11 AC as well, and it's going to be designed and assembled in the US as opposed to China, which is fantastic. But anyway, let's go up to the fact that Apple not innovating and things like this. So, Mac Pros are used by professional people. They're used by people that need lots of computing power. They're dealing with media. Like things like Pixar will use them for creating media and things like that. But where the industry changed from Apple about a year ago, I suppose, they went with HP workstations, because HP workstations are fucking insane. They're insanely easy to upgrade, HP workstations, especially the new line, the Z line, I think they're called. And they've got, well, not only because obviously because the Mac Pro hasn't been updated for ages, but you can update a lot of things. And so when like new graphics cards comes along and you want to be able to have like a render farm in a box, you want to be able to have tons of GPUs and be able to replace them on the fly quite easily. Now the Mac Pro, the new Mac Pro, is too small. And it's not going to have enough compute power. Well, it's going to have some compute power, but not going to be enough for people to warrant going out and buying them. So when the likes of Pixar, because Pixar now they all pretty much all use Adobe Final Cut, Adobe CS6 and things like that. Nobody uses Final Cut anymore because Final Cut is a piece of shit. The new version of Final Cut is crap. As much as it's crap for proper professional movie makers, it's really good for noobs now, which is good. But for the studios, they don't care about that. So now they've moved over to Adobe CS5 and Adobe CS6, and also the fact that it can use the GPU better, and so therefore you can render things faster. And it's also got this entire sort of suite of apps you can use to do lots of funky things when you're dealing with workflows and stuff like that. And so nobody in the industry will go out and buy a Mac Pro, as much as it's small and it looks cool. Granted, it looks quite cool. It does look a little bit like a waste paper basket, but nobody in the industry is going to go out and buy one because it'll be out of date after 6 months. I mean, granted, it's got a lot of compute power in a really tiny case, in a really small form factor, fantastic, brilliant. You can put it, in terms of desk space, it's fantastic. But, again, industry won't do that. They won't buy, considering the cost as well. The cost will be insane. You can buy something like a HP work. I mentioned the HP workstation because they're pretty much the best of the best at the moment. I think Dell makes some stuff which is really quite cool that the industry again use. But HP pretty much are the market leader in terms of workstation PCs, considering they've got things that they've got laptops which are pretty much workstation spec. They've also got all-in-ones which are workstation spec. So you can have like an all-in-one that's got like a dual NVIDIA. Is it NVIDIA? Not NVIDIA, Titan, something, and the other ones, the real professional ones. So they'll have like dual NVIDIAs and you can swap them out, and it's like fantastic tech that HP are doing. And then Apple come along with this Mac Pro that's just like, granted, it's a cool little form factor. It's brilliant, fantastic for somebody like me, for instance. Like I might go out and buy one because Final Cut Pro for noobs like me, it's really good. I mean, Sony Vegas Pro is pretty much my baby at the moment. That's what I use because I can't go along with Adobe Premiere Pro because it's just a pain in the ass to use, and you need to use their entire suite of apps, and it just doesn't work. So I use Sony Vegas Pro 12 at the moment. But Final Cut Pro would be good for, say, like YouTubers. Fine, fair enough, granted. But the industry, no, they won't. They won't bother with it. They won't upgrade to Mac. I mean, some of them might, but majority won't. They'll probably upgrade to HPs because in terms of total cost of ownership and things like that, it'll be cheaper to go and get HPs because, again, as much as Apple's customer service is fucking amazing, if you go enterprise, so is pretty much everybody's, especially in the enterprise. And enterprise matters. People will say, oh, it doesn't matter because it's all about customer. Bullshit. Enterprise makes up the majority of the customer base. They spend the most money, and therefore, if Apple can't win the enterprise, they're fucked. They'll still get the enterprise market for artsy-fartsy people or people that work in IT that are very militant with, oh, Apple's the best thing since sliced bread. They will still get that. Industry won't buy, I don't think, industry will upgrade to the new Mac Pro, because as much as it's at this very moment in time, specs wise, it's really good. But when you want to upgrade it, you can't, because it's all in this one like thing. Because with Mac Pros, the whole point of Mac Pros was that they were workstations, and you could upgrade them if you really wanted to. If a new graphics card came along and it was suitable for Mac, you could upgrade it, and it was no problem at all. But because Windows is so because Windows has got that thing where you can pretty much chuck anything in a box and it'll pretty much work. Therefore, the newest tech that comes along, people can upgrade it and it's fine and dandy. But with this new Mac Pro, you can't do that. Yeah, so that's pretty much it really on the Mac Pro. So I've rambled on far too much about Apple and WWDC, and my tea's now slightly going cold. But basically, Apple haven't innovated anything. They've not released anything that's wow, fantastic, really cool. Well, apart from the Mac Pro, I'm going to have this as like a little asterisk sort of aside. If I had the money to, and I had the choice between getting a workstation PC or a Mac Pro, for me personally, I would go and get a Mac Pro, because I do want to learn Final Cut, because Final Cut is, you can do some really funky things with Final Cut, and it's quite noob friendly now. And I still want to learn Mac. I do still want to learn Mac, because I work in IT and I work in tech support, and people still do use Macs. People use Linux as well, but still a lot of people still do use Macs, and so for me, I still want to be able to use it. And also, it's got a lot of compute power in a really small case, real small form factor, and I could pretty much chuck it on my desk without having to worry about trying to find space for it. So for me personally, I would go out and buy a Mac Pro, because the specs at the moment are really good, etc., etc. But industry won't, and I suppose that's kind of why they've changed their tack. They're moving towards customers and consumers, because industry aren't buying Macs anymore, and they're not buying iPads and stuff like that, because they're not fit for purpose. iOS now is a bit of a mess, really. As much as it's adding enterprise support, which is really cool, it's still behind. You can't do as much stuff as you can with Android, because for instance, if you had a suite of Android phones, you had a suite of Android phones, you had a suite of iPhones, or a suite of iOS devices, so iPhones, iPads, and you have an app that's created, you have to get it verified by Apple before it can be put onto your iPhones. But if you've got a suite of Android devices, you don't have to have them in the Google Play Store. You can just have an APK that people can download and install as much as you want it on the Google Play Store, so people can automatically update. Sometimes there's stuff you don't want publicly accessible to everybody in the world. You just want your members of staff to be able to use that APK and use that program. You can do that on Android, and you can do some other funky things with Android that you can't on iOS. You can have profiles, you can embed it, integrate it well with Exchange and things like that. Active Directory and things like that. And as much as you can control it a lot with Windows, so with Mac Server and iPhones and stuff like that. Again, Android's a lot better for that. As is actually Windows Phone. Windows Phone is really good because it integrates really well with Exchange, with Active Directory, as you'd expect, because it's a Microsoft product. But basically, Apple haven't innovated anything. They've copied what the industry have done, and that's a real shame, because Apple could have done a lot better at WWDC. They really could. They had so much they could have done, and they didn't. They just copied the market, and they did what they always do, which is just, well, I say always do. Ever since Steve Jobs died, Apple have lost it. They've lost it. They don't invent anything anymore. They don't innovate anything, and they just copy people, and they'll claim that they don't. They like slagging off the competition. They like creating frivolous lawsuits, but they won't innovate. They just won't do it, and it's really not good for Apple. And I'm probably going to get a lot of hate from Apple fanboys, but I don't give a shit, because Apple. I had a lot of time for Apple back in the day. Granted, they made some really cool stuff. I have an iPad, for Christ's sake. I'm not like I'm completely Apple militant. I don't like Apple. I like some of the stuff that Apple produced, because, to be honest, I still don't think Android tablets are there yet. Really, I still think Apple tablets are the best, because they're easy use and because they're built like brick shithouses and things like that. As much as mine's quite an expensive hand warmer at the moment, I think that's more to do with the operating system, because it's kind of calmed down a little bit since iOS 6 released. But yeah, Apple haven't innovated anything, and it's a real shame because they've got some really cool people, they've got some really interesting ideas, and they won't do it. In actual fact, I'd say Microsoft innovate more than anybody. I'm going to say this because Microsoft's research department is fucking amazing. Some of the stuff they do with a lot of their compute tech is fucking sweet. It's just so many really cool stuff that's going on. They have some really cool. I mean, Google have some really cool research stuff going on and some real like innovative stuff. But you look at what Microsoft are producing behind the scenes, brilliant stuff, really creating some really cool tech, some really cool stuff. We won't ever see it into the market, but they're doing some really good stuff, and it's really good to see Microsoft actually wasting a lot of money on research, because Google do that a lot. They waste a lot of money on research. Apple don't generally. They waste a lot of money on research or pretend, create something for customers, but like so Google and Microsoft do like a lot of research for just because why not, to give their staff something to do to expand their staff's innovation and things like that, and Apple aren't doing that, and it's a real shame because Apple have got some really cool people working with them, and Tim Cook's a wank stain, he needs to go. That's pretty much it. That's all I've got to say on the matter. Links in the description below of the TechCrunch stuff where you can find out more about WWDC. Also a link in the description below where you can watch the keynote if you really want to. You want to waste an hour and whatever it is, watch the keynote, you can do that. And apart from that, I shall catch you in a later video.